Okay. So you want to get started, Dominica?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to the AMA today for the book club for Making Work Visible. We've got our star, our author, Dominica, here with us to answer the questions. We've got some that have come in through the AMA channel and a few others that have come in from other places. If you have questions during this, and I hope and assume that you will, you can post them using the Q&A feature here on Zoom, or you can post them in the AMA channel in the Slack workspace. So first question we've got here is a question about utilization rates. My team agrees that 80% utilization is a good thing, but the solution they jump to is assigning 1 day per week for unplanned work. This just creates a whole new list of WIP. How can WIP limits keep people from being overutilized?
Yeah. Having a day, um, having a day to deal with unplanned work is good. Having a day with no meetings is even better, where you can work on your most important work. I mean, maybe your unplanned work isn't your most important work. Maybe some of it is. But I think that teams need blocked out time on their calendar to do this complex work where we don't get interrupted. If you can get that a couple times a week, a 90-minute period or a 2-hour period on your calendar, because if you've got the all-day cram going on or the triple book wham kind of calendar going on, you don't have time to breathe. That's a problem. And so find a way to give yourself time to breathe during the day. Start your meetings at 5 after, end them at 5 too, and insert chunks of time on your calendar to focus on your most important work. And if at the time that's something that's unplanned, then given that question was specifically about unplanned work, though, I would suggest doing an exercise to be really, what is unplanned work? Define that really clearly. Like somebody knows about it. Unplanned for who? Somebody likely knows about it. And is the problem really in the communication, that people can't anticipate what's headed their way because they're unaware of it? So how do we help people anticipate what's headed their way, be more aware of the work? And then for work that's truly unplanned, clearly define what that is. Is that a production issue? Production's down? Or is that a tap on the shoulder from somebody that you wouldn't mind being interrupted by because meeting with them is maybe funner than what you're doing now? Yeah, but once you have a clear definition of unplanned work, then you can start to make it visible and see how much of it you have and what to do about it.
I love that idea of unplanned work being planned for other people and it being a communication issue.
Yeah. And then you can have a WIP limit to reduce being utilized at such high levels. But if your calendars have got meetings, if you have no time in your calendar all day long, then that's where the rubber hits the road with the WIP limit and the utilization, what's showing up on your calendar, and how do you get to the point where you can insert do not disturb hours in there, kind of like this, where maybe you have from 1:30 to 3 or something a couple days a week, and you just have to socialize it and let people know, hey, I'll be back at 3 today. Unless production is on fire, I'm going to be working on to finish my number one priority today. So people will know not to bug you unless it's truly something's burning.
Totally. You can guard some super productive hours. Okay, we've got another question here. It's about workflow mapping. How do you position this quick exercise from chapter 2 with a value stream mapping? When do you recommend to use one or the other?
Quick exercise from chapter 2. Like, which one is that? Part 2? From part 2?
Chapter 2, part 1 is what I'm being referenced here.
Ooh, what page? You got a page number?
I don't have a page.
I'm wondering if you're talking about, like, there's an exercise for the demand analysis, workflow mapping. Maybe they're talking about workflow mapping to make the work visible, to see what's being worked on. Let's repeat the question again, Alex.
Yeah, and to Jack's question, I'll start posting them in the chat as well. So a question about workflow mapping.
Yeah.
How do you position this quick exercise with a value stream mapping? Jack, Joanne is saying maybe page 47.
Oh, page 47. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And when do you recommend to use one or the other?
So page 47 is this visual here. The workflow mapping exercise is actually on page 62.
Joanne is saying they're using Kindle, so it might be different.
Oh, that's why. Okay, I'm going to assume it's the workflow mapping exercise, and that your question is related to that versus value stream mapping. Give us a thumbs up or a note in chat. So for what I call workflow mapping in here, I now kind of speak to that in terms of diagramming your value stream. I call it a value stream canvas exercise. And the idea is to, in the book, we're essentially making this work, making the flow of the work visible. How does work arrive? What are the steps, the states it goes through in order to deliver business value or customer value if it's at a team level for an internal customer. From a value stream perspective, end-to-end value stream, which is much more powerful if you're looking to see where your bottleneck is in the larger system. For that exercise, what we do now, and there's actually a value stream canvas exercise that is a collateral that we're going to update, but it currently exists out there as a companion piece to Kirsten's book, Project to Product. And so I would take a look at that, and Alex, you can probably point them to that. It's up on ITRev site. But for the value stream, the difference between the value stream mapping and value stream management that we're looking forward to getting to is the mapping is really it's a moment in time of the activities that are occurring. And so it's a useful exercise to go through in the beginning to understand the activities that occur and the handoffs that occur and in the tools that are involved. And that way you can start to have that should drive conversations around where do things get stuck, where are the holdups, where are the bottlenecks, where do we want to focus our energy on experimenting with improvements, what do we want to tackle. For example, if you're doing a value stream mapping or value stream canvas exercise, very similar, and it turns out that one of the things where things get hung up is with CAB meetings, change approval board meetings, and you discover that everything's got to go through CAB before it makes it to production, and it takes a long time, and that's problematic. So it can provoke these kinds of conversations on what to do about CAB. Can we make CAB just for high risk work, and all the less riskier, more standard work? Can that can that just go through outside of the CAB approval process? So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but with workflow, it's really all in the one same, right? We're trying to make the work that we do visible, ideally at the value stream level, end to end, from when we start working on something to when the customer can consume the thing that was delivered. I think in the book, the workflow mapping was done, that particular exercise was done at a team level. But you can do these at whatever level you're at. It's not limited to just the team level. You can look at your entire product value stream, and I would recommend you do so.
Perfect. If you have any follow-up questions about that, feel free to post them and we'll address them in a little bit. Okay, we've got another question here. Another question concerning time management. I believe it may be the same asker. If we can't measure the time capacity that is used by work type and only know their number of items, how can we manage our capacity?
Well, this is about managing flow and managing by work in progress, managing queues, because we can really only focus on one complicated thing at a time. It doesn't really matter if it's big or small, but we're trying to manage our work through the concept of flow and ensuring that our work in progress isn't so huge that we're bouncing around working on lots of different things and context switching with lots of interruptions and unplanned work. So with flow, we're focused on like the one thing, the most important thing to do right now, given the priorities that have been set, and focusing on that until it's either done or it's done enough to a point where you can get feedback on it, and making those items as small as possible so that you have the advantage of getting that feedback rapidly and course correcting if needed. We know how long that work takes if we're measuring flow time or your cycle time or your lead time, whatever terminology you're using there. So we'll know how long that work took. If we're also measuring the flow load, the work in progress, and your throughput, then we can see, because the more WEP, the longer things take. And you can measure that and you can show that to your teams. You can present that data, present your metrics to show the fewer things that we work on and the smaller batch size they are, the faster they get delivered.
Excellent. Okay, we've got another question that just came in here. Can you give an example or two from your experience of beneficial outcomes to sharing the quote, make work visible outcomes? Who have you shared the now visible work with? And how has that helped control disruptions, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, first off, it's really hard to manage invisible work. And you probably have a million things on your plate that you're doing. But other people, if they can't see that, then they don't understand why their thing isn't your number one priority. You could have 20 projects going, 20 different project managers, and they all think that their request should be your number one priority, maybe because they can't see everything that you're working on. And so that's one of the huge benefits of making your work visible, is that now other people can understand why you're not available when needed. Right? If you're the only person on the team with a special skill set or talent, and you're on a shared services team maybe, you can be pulled in many different directions. You can be the bottleneck in that situation. So to help with that, make that work visible so others can see it, and then be really clear with prioritization on what you're working on right now. And this is where we're at. This is the state it's in. And here, maybe here's what's coming up next. Here's what was just completed. So a specific example in my world is I work with lots of different, very large enterprises, lots of on calls every day with customers, helping them improve their flow. And so we have Kanban boards at sort of the engagement level with the different customers that we're working on. And like what I'm doing today, that's on the board too. So people looking at our board know, this is what we've got going on today, going on this week. This is what is in progress right now. And your request is like over here. And people can start to see, if they can see all the work, all the competing priorities, they can begin to understand why their request maybe is where it is, and it's not happening today, and maybe it's further on down the priority list. Maybe that's a next week thing. And so we do that every day with our boards so that people can understand. They have the visibility, so they can understand where their thing is and why, and that there's other things in front of it, and what the competing priorities are.
Great. Yeah. If you have any other examples too that you want to share around that, maybe working with somebody, I'm sure our questioner would love that. I also have another question here too. We could come back to this if we want to add any more examples.
Well, there's a story I talk about in the book about the team of 40 IT ops engineers, and they had 2 project managers. That's what happens, particularly if you're working in a project-centric way of working, and there's lots of dependencies, is that people get put in place in order to coordinate. And so where there's like highly coupled systems and lots of dependencies, then there's high coordination costs with that. And bringing visibility to all those competing requests, we did that. This was on a physical board, but it was just temporary. We just did it for a week as an experiment on a physical board where most of the engineers were co-located in this one area. And every time the project managers got interrupted, because I asked them, what prevents you from getting your work done? And they said, we get interrupted all the time. We're constantly interrupted. I said, okay, let's create just a simple post-it. Every time you get interrupted, just scribble down the nature of that interruption, put it up on a board, kind of similar to this one, and do that for a week to get an understanding and make this unplanned interruptions visible. And so they did that. And there were 92 interruptions that week. And all kinds of ideas sparked out of this 1 week experiment. But the first one was that most of the interruptions were related to people wanting to know what the status was. Where is my request? I requested this thing, and I don't know, it's gone dark. What happened to it? So that triggered a redesign of their Jira workflow and using Confluence to make sure that requesters could get visibility on the status of their thing. The other thing that experiment did was they recognized that they had lots of projects, and many of them would get to 90% done. They couldn't get to 100% done. And so we had all these open projects in WIP. So they created a dedicated team, one sysadmin, one network engineer, one DBA, and a project manager. And they were dedicated to just finishing all these projects that were 90% done. And in the first 30 days, so they were supposed to take everything else off their plate. And in the first 30 days, they completed 10 of those projects that were 90% done. So it was a huge success in demonstrating what happens when you can limit people's WIP and have them heads down focusing on completing work. It's stop starting and start finishing work so you can get things off your plate before committing to do other things.
A psychological burden lifted, having those completed.
Yeah. Well, it makes us feel good, right? There's endorphins that occur when we check things off and we actually complete something. Oh, yeah, I have another example. I don't know if you want to ask another question now, but I was thinking
let's have it.
I mean, with respect to time, is using Pomodoros. When I get bogged down and I really need to finish something, but I find myself getting distracted with other requests or Slacks that come in, or my list is too long for the day, I use Pomodoros, which, is a kind of tomato sauce, but it's also a way to, it's 25 minutes or 30 minutes, and you set a timer. I like the kitchen timer, the one that goes so I can hear the sound that it's making. I don't use my phone because once I look at my phone, then I get distracted. And I don't let anything disrupt I turn the sound off. I try to mute my laptop, mute my phone, and I'm just heads down, focusing on this most important thing to get it done. And I make it real small batch size to finish this in 25 minutes, or finish this little piece of it in 25 minutes. And what happens is, the ringer goes off and you're supposed to put your pencils down sometimes, but often it's like, oh, I'm almost done, just a few more minutes. And then I'll finish it and then pencil down. And it just feels so good to actually finish something. Like, what we all need is some satisfaction, the boost we get psychologically from actually finishing something. It's not that people aren't talented, it's that they're constantly interrupted. And so if we can reduce these interruptions, allow people to have this dedicated, uninterrupted time to just finish something, it's very rewarding, very rewarding.
The Pomodoro ticking reminds me of there's a meditation technique where you're supposed to just count slowly in your head. You have to visualize the numbers. And if you lose it, you have to start all over again. I'm just picturing that tick of just keeping pace with the work. So we had I'll go for it.
Well, I was gonna say, and be sure to take a break. Don't just sit in front of your screen for 3 hours. Start your meetings at, build in these breaks. I do this with customers and they love it. We start meetings at 5 after. Sometimes with my team, we'll start at 10 after, just so people have time to think and eat and go to the bathroom, right? We need to give ourselves permission to take these little breaks in between these tasks. We can stand up, stretch, take a walk, and before coming back and going heads down and do another Pomodoro.
So we have I think think a quick follow-up to one of the other questions. How much of an admin burden are the activities of making work visible in general?
Hmm. Uh, well, I do think it's useful to consider the overhead of making that work visible versus the value you get out of it. And um, there are some things that maybe it's not worthwhile to make visible, and other things that are more important to make visible. And there's no silver bullet there. That's a discussion with your team to decide what's most important for us to get visibility on right now, and what is, start where you are. Start where you are with what you have. And I wouldn't try to, there's a fine line between making everything visible, because sometimes I'll say, make everything visible, but maybe that's not where you're at yet. Maybe you need to, depending on your constraints, the system that you're in, the pain points that your team has, the team's capability for delivering customer value. Maybe you need to just start in this one area and make, for example, one experiment that the team was doing is one of their biggest pain point was that they needed to procure something. If something needed a purchase order, if it needed a PO, things took forever because of the way their accounting and finance processes were. And so they created a board, and one of their swim lanes was needs a PO or PO required. And then another swim lane was work that did not require a PO, a purchase order. And you could see the speed and the rate of the work flowing across the board that didn't need a PO, and what happened with work that needed a PO, and how long it sat in that state, waiting on PO. And,
Wow.
and they were able to use that, and they measured that, and they used that, and they took that to the CFO basically and said, here's what we're experiencing. Here's our pain point. And that contributed to the finance organization doing some sort of technical debt work on their PO process and improve that.
Great discovery. Wow. I've got the next question here. I've just participated in my first lean coffee yesterday evening, and I found it very valuable.
Nice.
This is a great way to discuss and exchange ideas on topics selected by the team members themselves. Mm-hmm. What seems to be more challenging is to keep notes and follow on actions. So do you have any tip or practice or tool to facilitate this?
Yeah. Well, I like to put an epiphanies column. So you got to discuss, discussing, and then done. And you add a fourth column for epiphanies or ahas. And in that column, so during the lean coffee, for example, if somebody mentions a book that they've read that is on that topic that's useful, then you could just scribble on a Post-it, the name of the book, and you put that in that fourth column on epiphanies. If there's an action item that's talked about, we should do this, write on a Post-it, put it in that fourth column, so that you have a list after your lean coffee of takeaways or epiphanies or things that were useful. At the DevOps Enterprise Summit conference, when we do lean coffees, that's what we do. We have an epiphanies column with the takeaways that were useful and discussed, and some of those can turn into action items, and others. So those would go into either your backlog, or they would go into your planning sessions, and you'd allow yourself, hopefully, with your flow distribution, with the types of work that you do, you have some WIP allocated for improvements, for technical debt, for some investment in future capability. And so that's often where those epiphanies, they end up being a type of debt work that needs to be done, or some kind of learning. And you allocate, maybe you can always have one of those items in play at any one time. I like that way to do it. So lean coffee, okay, we're gonna I don't know, we're gonna read this book on atomic habits. It's a great book. We need to get some good habits going. So read Atomic Habits in the Epiphany column, and then we create a card for that on our Kanban. And we can pull that in as soon as we finish the previous debt work that we were working on. So flow distribution is it's a distribution of your different kinds of work. So you allocate capacity to work on features, and you allocate capacity to work on defects, and you allocate capacity to work on debt, like technical debt work. Well, learning is a type of debt work. Debt is it's like an investment to improve things down the road. And so give yourself permission to allocate capacity to do that kind of work. And the fourth work kind of type is what we call risk, which is major risks to the business around security or compliance or GDPR, things like that.
Excellent. Next question is, I really love that you included content about the challenges of context switching. Can you share a bit more about this challenge?
Context switching. Yeah. So context switching impacts our cognitive load. Cognitive load is what we have on our working memory. And when we're learning something new, we need to keep it in our working memory long enough, sufficiently, in order to process it so that it will go into long-term memory. And if we have a lot of context switching going on, we can become cognitively overloaded. And so people will ask, well, how much WIP should we have? How much is too much? And it turns out that depends on your level of stress, because stress impacts cognitive functioning. And so there's signals if you've got, I talk about, we don't let our computers get to 100% capacity utilization. Why do we let our people? Well, it's a lot easier to read computers because there's log files, and apps start to freeze if CPU utilization is high. Humans, much harder to read, but you can, there are signals that we can view. And I mean, stress causes all kinds of things, outside of having too much work in progress. But I mean, eventually it's unhealthy to have too much WIP and pile on the stress. And you see, people have a sore back or a stiff neck, or you're not sleeping well at night, and it can lead to exhaustion. And interestingly enough, it can lead to loss of confidence, which is one of the symptoms of burnout. And so that's why it's so critical to limit the context switching, is so that, sorry, I'm jumping around, but I just remembered, like, another big symptom is that you forget things. You think about just being introduced to somebody, and then 5 minutes later, you forget what their name is. It's easy to understand how we would easily forget something we just reviewed, or something we just read, or something we were just working on, if we have too much context switching going on, and how we need to keep things in our short-term memory long enough so we can process that into long-term memory. So, I mean, the bottom line is reducing interruptions and limiting. That's why it's so critical to limit WIP, so we can work on something long enough to complete it.
I love the idea of switching it from short-term to long-term memory as like our goal for that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what it's like? You get started on something, you get interrupted, you go work on something else. By the time you get back to what you were working on, it can take up to, there's studies that show take a good 20 minutes to get back to the point where you were, if it's complicated. I mean, the difference between, with all this context switching, it's like we can't really multitask, right? It's really just stopping and starting, which is fine for computers, but it has disastrous consequences for humans, right? 2 airplanes get approved to land on the same runway, or a baby gets left in an overheated automobile in a parking garage. It's just not a good thing. We want to avoid context switching and having too much on the plate, so that so we can walk and talk at the same time. That's not a problem. The problem in like computers is we can really only focus on one thing at a time, on a complicated or complex item. So if you're a creative maker, designers, writers, developers, you need your heads down, uninterrupted time to do your work. And if you can't get that work done during regular business hours, when are you going to do it? Like if you're reserving 11 p.m. at night to do that work, or Sunday afternoon, because you can't get it done during normal business hours, then you have to ask, is that sustainable? It's that if you're working 12 hours a day, every day, because you're context switching so much, versus if you have this just heads down on an uninterrupted time, you'd be able to finish things faster. That's the hard point to, like, intuitively, I think people get it, but in reality, we just keep starting new stuff before finishing them. It's sometimes it's just us who have a hard time saying no. More no, less WIP.
But yeah, I get caught in the distraction cycle sometimes, for sure. Okay, we got this next question here. Do you have any suggestions for combining work from disparate work streams? We've got internal projects, external projects, and help desks that all use different systems to track.
Yeah. 2 thoughts on that one, because I heard the word projects, and there's a huge movement underway of moving from project to product. So Mick Kirsten, our CEO at Tasktop, wrote the book on it. I highly recommend that you take a peek at this, because it talks about all the benefits of managing work by product versus projects. Projects in general are rather short-lived. They come and go. People are treated as fungible resources instead of the domain knowledge experts that they are. For projects, when they come to an end, they sort of get thrown over the wall to a sustainment team who has to come up to speed on that domain knowledge, while the domain knowledge that was in the project team runs off to start a new project. With product teams, you have long-lived teams who have the domain knowledge and the experience, and they stay in that team. They stay at that value stream team. And so there's fewer dependencies and less context switching. Read me the last part of that question again, Alex. Was there something about shared services, like a help desk that is supporting multiple
Yeah, we've got internal projects, external projects, and help desk that all use different systems to track.
To track? Yeah. So there are tools out there that integrate other tools like Desktop as an integration platform, but there's other, you can find ways to utilize those APIs to have integrations between the tools so that you don't have this duplicated effort of having this, the same work in Jira that you would have in ServiceNow, for example. So that was I said two things starting out. One was manage work by product versus project. And the other is to work toward integrating those artifacts so that you don't have this duplicate entry and having to go in different tools to find that work. And if you're a shared services team that is supporting many different projects or products, then work to find a way to make some of those requests self-service. Is there any way that instead of having to manually address some of these help desk issues, can you automate any of it? Like, what is the highest, if you looked at all the help desk requests, which type of request do you get the most? Is it access to a database or something? Is a way that you can turn that into a self-service module that people can go request that on their own and find a way to automate that. If possible, you're not going to automate everything, maybe not, but can you reduce your need to be interrupted by having people be able to serve that up themselves?
There's a similar one that came in, so I'm going to lump this one in here. One of the reasons that people on my current client team take on too much WIP is that we often wait a long time for pull request feedback. I'd like to support my observation with data so that we can discuss whether the cost of delay of pull requests is worth the benefits. We use Jira and GitHub Enterprise. I was thinking about visualizing something like the time between when the pull request is created and the first comment or approval. So related to the earlier question about the overhead of making work visible, do you know of any tools that might help automate this over a given time frame?
Yeah, well, I would insert a wait state, waiting on feedback into your workflow. I mean, you could add states into Jira, unless you get like huge pushback on adding a state, because then it shows up in all of the other projects. But you can also use like the flag field in Jira to identify, because I know there's a blocked, but I don't recommend using blocked, because we want to know what state the work is in when it's blocked. So we want to know it's waiting for feedback so we can measure it. We want the clock, we want to get the cycle time on waiting for feedback. So you can measure that. Now you can build your case to say, this is how long this is like our flow efficiency, and waiting on feedback is sort of where our bottleneck is. And then that will prompt a discussion on what to do about that. That wait states are a really powerful way, depending on what tool you use. There might be a different way of inserting that wait state. Most organizations don't have enough states, in my opinion. They might have four or five states. Most of them will be active states. I'm not saying you need a wait state in front of every active state, but if you're aware of one that is problematic, and the ones I'm usually aware of with organizations is waiting on some kind of verification or QA, or waiting on design. It's usually not in development. It's usually downstream or upstream. We call that water scrum fall. where the bottleneck, the weight states tend to be upstream or downstream. But find a way, because making that visible would be useful for you, because then you'd get the data, the metrics that you need to build your case to go do something about it. So then the effort involved in doing that could help you make the case for change so that you can affect change. And then after a while, maybe you don't need that metric anymore. I mean, things evolve, things change, things are always changing. So depending on where the bottleneck is now, that's the focus. Once that's reduced, another bottleneck will emerge, and then you'll go work on elevating that bottleneck and making sure that it gets the resources and the love and the attention that it needs, and that everything else is deprioritized, that people go help the area that is bottlenecked. And that often people want to hire other people. Oh, we need to hire more developers. Well, no, what are developers waiting on? Well, they're waiting on wireframes. Okay. So, maybe we need to hire more designers. Or if it's on the validate end or the feedback end, maybe developers should go help with test or with feedback before pulling in new work. Anyway, whatever you want to experiment with, inserting wait states so you can measure that wait time, I found to be extremely useful.
Good. We've got another question here. There's a concept of transparency and making work visible. As you understand it, would you say these are similar?
Oh, well, in a very broad sense, yes. Being transparent would be making your work visible. I'm reminded of why sometimes people don't make their work visible and they're not transparent. Sometimes it depends on the culture too, but sometimes work is done under the table and there's no transparency on it, because if people were transparent about it, it would not be in alignment with the priorities that have been set for the organization or for the team. And so then one would have to ask, I would want to ask, why does that work need to be done under the table? How do we gain alignment with whoever we need to gain alignment with? And if it's between like IT and business people, because priorities can be off there. For example, if we know we need to work on technical debt, but work is being managed by project, and project manager the scope is only for features, and like no technical, not in my project. Go do your technical debt somewhere else. Okay, well, I guess I'll do it at 11 p.m. tonight or under the table, because if we don't decouple this massive big ball of mud, then we're just going to continue. It's going to continue. We're just going to have so much debt that we're going to come to a crawling stop. So I just went off on a tangent there, Alex. We were talking about transparency and making work visible. So I guess I'm just talking out loud, reflecting on that. I kind of think of transparency as being a bit more of a human safety factor and trust, versus making work visible being a term used more literally in where can I go to see this business value or this work or this technical debt that we're actually working on. I don't know if that made sense.
I think so. We got our question asker. Maybe they can win if that answered the question for them there. Next one I've got. Yes, the answer is yes, it did. Do you ever use the lean coffee topics that did not get discussed in the lean coffee session for some other purpose later on?
You know, if it's important enough, it will come up again. The fast answer is not really, other than we show what they are. Like I usually do, you know, I usually like take pictures of the lean coffee board, or if it's digital, then you have that information. And we'll say, you know, maybe we can talk about these next time. But it's really all about who shows up. They drive the agenda. So if they want to talk about it next time and they're going to vote on it, and that's really the whole point of lean coffee, is people democratically deciding what's most important to be discussed at this point in time. And if items aren't voted on, then apparently not. Bring it to the next lean coffee, or talk about it in your round of closing comments. Because the point of lean coffee, one of the benefits is that everybody's voice can be heard. So even if your thing didn't get selected or voted on, people saw what it was, and you can bring it up again in the round of closing comments to emphasize your point on that one, and then bring it up again at your next lean coffee. And if nobody is interested in what you're really passionate about, then maybe that's a clue to finding another group who is interested in that topic. You know, find the coalition of the willing for that topic.
Maybe that feeds into this next question here.
Okay.
We used Mural for this lean coffee. This is the person who asked about the previous lean coffee that they had just done. Do you know other good tools to facilitate these meetings virtually?
Yeah, I like using Mural a lot. But recently I used an app, Lean Coffee board, Lean Coffee something. And it was really great. It had the timer in there. It had good voting. So there are digital apps out there specifically for Lean Coffee. So I don't remember the exact. I can follow up with you, Alex, and send you a link if you want to, or I can pop that into the channel. Some people use Miro, not to be confused with Mural. It's like
similar.
Yeah.
Have you ever used something like in a virtual space, like have you been on Gather? You know, where you virtually move around in a space? Because you were just saying, you know, maybe you should find a group that is more in line with the topic you want to focus on. And so there's this ability to like vote with your feet a little bit.
I just lost.
Oops. Am I still there?
You're still here. Maybe I froze for a moment. You froze for a moment, but my internet was unstable. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
So can you repeat what you just said?
So we used a tool called Gather for the most recent DevOps Enterprise Summit. Yeah. And basically every person has like a little 2D avatar. They can move around the screen. We used it for the Birds of a Feather sessions, and it worked really well because people, you know, not just clicking into Zoom rooms to maybe find topics they wanted to discuss, but they could actually just like walk around and visually see who was interested in what topics, how many there were. Like, would something like that serve Lean Coffee?
We should try that. I haven't tried that yet, but I'm all up for trying new ways of working and seeing, you know, new apps, new tools, see how they might work. We should give it a shot.
Cool. Well, then it sounds like we'll follow up with the other link as well for the tool that Dominica mentioned And unless there are any last minute questions, we're just about out of time here. So I don't know if you have any parting comments, Dominica. Otherwise, we'll close up here.
Parting comment. Well, I think my parting comment would be that somebody is going to influence your boss, and that can be you, and that you can become the voice of reason in your organization. I do think that starts with making that work visible so that it can be measured, so that you have metrics to give you the evidence necessary for you to affect change. That would be my parting comment.
Beautiful. That reminds me, there is going to be a new IT Revolution immersion class. The first one will be with Dominica, Making Work Visible, Core Concepts. I'll post a link to that if you want to check out the trailer that has become available. It's pretty amazing. And Dominica, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Great questions also.
Very nice.
Be back in Slack, everybody.
Oh, can we save the chat? Let me just save that real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.